Oh! Ow! Ow, please! Ow, please stop!
Who did this to you? Please, wake up.
Husband and mistress locked wife in toilet. CEO found her and fell in love with her. Distinguished viewers, welcome to Luxury True Life Stories. Please like and subscribe for more amazing real-life luxury stories. Now, let's get into the story. Susan Hayes grew up in the calm seaside town of Brighton, where the sound of waves and the scent of salt water were part of everyday life. She was the only child of Richard Hayes, a hard-working marine engineer, and Linda Hayes, a kind librarian who filled their home with books and warmth. Their modest house overlooked a quiet street not far from the shore, and Susan spent much of her childhood walking along the beach or sitting on the sand with a small sketchbook. Painting and drawing became her favorite hobbies, and through art she expressed the peaceful world she saw around her. Susan was known for her gentle nature and quiet determination. She loved animals, volunteered at a nearby shelter, and often helped her mother organize reading events at the local library. Her dream was simple but meaningful, to one day open her own small art studio where people could come together to create and share beauty. Her parents encouraged her passion, believing that talent mixed with hard work could shape a bright future. Though her life felt peaceful and predictable, Susan had no idea that the path ahead would lead her far away from Brighton. The simple dreams she held close to her heart would soon be tested by betrayal, heartbreak, and unexpected encounters that would change her life forever. Daniel Clifford lived a very different life from Susan Hayes. He resided in London, in a sleek apartment overlooking the busy streets of the financial district, where ambition and competition filled the air every single day. Daniel worked as a rising financial analyst at a prestigious investment firm, and at 32 years old he had already built a reputation for being sharp, persuasive, and relentlessly driven. To Daniel, success was not just a dream, it was a necessity. He believed wealth and influence were the only ways to earn respect in a world that valued power above everything else. Daniel came from a family that valued status and achievement. His father, George Clifford, was a well-known corporate lawyer who had spent decades building connections with powerful clients. His mother, Margaret Clifford, moved comfortably among elite social circles and believed appearances were everything. Margaret often reminded Daniel that the right marriage could strengthen his position in society. She expected him to eventually choose a partner who would elevate the family's reputation and complement his ambitious lifestyle. Despite the polished image he presented to the world, Daniel possessed a calculating mind. He knew how to charm people when necessary and how to hide his true intentions behind confidence and sophistication. While he worked tirelessly to climb higher in the corporate world, he also attended many social gatherings and business events where influential people gathered. It was at one of these elegant charity events in London, an evening meant to raise funds for a community art foundation, that Daniel Clifford would soon meet someone completely different from the people he was used to. Someone whose sincerity and warmth would momentarily intrigue him, without him realizing how deeply their lives would eventually become intertwined. The charity art gala was held in a grand London exhibition hall filled with elegant decorations, soft classical music, and walls covered with beautiful paintings from upcoming artists. Guests from different industries mingled while waiters moved quietly between them carrying trays of sparkling drinks. The event had been organized to support community art programs, and many visitors came not only to donate but also to appreciate the artwork displayed throughout the hall. Among the artists invited to exhibit their work was Susan Hayes, who had traveled from Brighton after being encouraged by her best friend Emily Carter. Susan felt slightly nervous as she stood beside her paintings, dressed in a simple yet graceful blue dress that contrasted with the expensive fashion worn by many of the guests. Her artwork, mostly inspired by the calm Brighton coastline, drew quiet admiration from several visitors who stopped to study the soft colors and peaceful landscapes she had painted. Emily stayed close to her, proudly introducing Susan as a talented artist to anyone who asked about the paintings. Susan did not seek attention or fame, but she was grateful for the opportunity to share something she loved. Across the hall, Danielle Clifford moved confidently through the crowd, greeting business associates and influential guests. When he passed Susan's display, one particular painting caught his attention, a sunset over the ocean painted with remarkable warmth and emotion. Curious, Daniel stepped closer and asked about the artist. Emily quickly introduced him to Susan, and for a brief moment the busy sounds of the gala seemed to fade. Daniel was struck by Susan's calm sincerity, while Susan found Daniel polite and charming. Their conversation began with art and travel, but neither of them realized that this simple meeting, surrounded by paintings and quiet music, would mark the beginning of a relationship that would change both of their lives in unexpected ways. After the charity gala, Daniel Clifford found himself thinking about Susan Hayes more often than he expected. Unlike the sophisticated women he usually met at corporate events, Susan possessed a quiet sincerity that felt refreshing. A few days after the gala, Danielle contacted her under the excuse of wanting to purchase the sunset painting that had captured his attention. Susan was surprised but pleased, believing he simply appreciated her work. They arranged to meet again in London, this time at a small cafe near the Thames where the atmosphere was calm and far removed from the loud elegance of the gala. Their meeting felt relaxed and natural. Daniel listened as Susan spoke about Brighton, her family, and her dream of opening an art studio one day. Susan, in turn, listened as Daniel described his demanding career in the financial industry. While Daniel usually kept conversations focused on business, he found himself enjoying Susan's gentle outlook on life. Over the following weeks, their meetings became more frequent. They visited art galleries, walked through parks, and shared quiet dinners where conversations stretched late into the evening. To Susan, Daniel appeared thoughtful and supportive. He praised her paintings and encouraged her to believe that her talent could lead to bigger opportunities. Gradually, affection grew between them, and what began as simple meetings soon turned into a serious relationship. Friends like Emily noticed the change in Susan's life and hoped Daniel's intentions were genuine. At the time, Susan believed she had met someone who admired her for who she truly was. She had no reason to suspect that beneath Daniel's charm and ambition, there were deeper motivations quietly shaping the future of their relationship. As months passed, Daniel and Susan's relationship grew stronger, at least from Susan's perspective. Daniel often visited Brighton, where he was welcomed warmly by Susan's parents. Richard Hayes appreciated Daniel's confidence and work ethic, while Linda Hayes admired the way he seemed to encourage Susan's artistic dreams. Family dinners were filled with laughter, stories, and plans for the future. Daniel played the role of the perfect partner, speaking politely and showing respect to everyone around him. Susan felt certain she had found someone who truly cared for her. Before long, Daniel proposed during a quiet evening walk along the Brighton shoreline. The sky was painted with warm shades of orange as the sun slowly disappeared into the sea. Daniel presented a beautiful ring and spoke about building a future together in London, promising that Susan would always have his support. Overwhelmed with emotion and happiness, Susan accepted immediately. To her, the moment felt like the beginning of the life she had always hoped for, a loving partnership built on trust and shared dreams. Their wedding took place a few months later in a small but elegant ceremony attended by close family and friends. Emily Carter stood proudly beside Susan, while Danielle's parents arrived dressed in refined elegance, observing everything with careful attention. After the ceremony, Susan moved to London to begin her new life as Danielle Clifford's wife. She believed she was stepping into a promising future filled with love and opportunity, unaware that the beautiful beginning of her marriage was quietly hiding the challenges and betrayals that would soon unfold. Life in London was exciting for Susan at first. Danielle's apartment was located in a modern building overlooking the busy city streets, and everything felt new and full of possibility. Susan began adjusting to her new environment while continuing to paint in a small studio room Daniel had set aside for her. She explored nearby art galleries, attended exhibitions, and occasionally met with Emily Carter, who worked as a journalist in the city. Though she missed the calm atmosphere of Brighton, Susan believed she was building a meaningful life with her husband. Daniel, however, became increasingly consumed by his career. His position at the investment firm demanded long hours, late meetings, and constant networking with powerful clients. At first Susan understood, believing his dedication was part of building a secure future for them both. But slowly, Daniel's behavior began to change. He returned home later at night, sometimes appearing distracted or impatient during their conversations. The warmth he once showed began to fade, replaced by short replies and frequent excuses about work obligations. Susan tried not to worry, convincing herself that Daniel was simply under pressure. She focused on her artwork and tried to support him whenever possible. Yet small details began to feel unsettling: missed dinners, unanswered calls, and the growing distance between them. While Susan continued to believe in her marriage and hoped things would improve, Daniel's world was expanding in directions she could not yet see. And somewhere within that world, another person was about to enter Daniel's life, someone whose presence would quietly begin to reshape everything. Around the same time Daniel's work responsibilities increased, a new employee joined his firm. Her name was Clara Patterson. She arrived with confidence, elegance, and a reputation for being exceptionally persuasive in business negotiations. Clara had grown up in Manchester in a struggling household, where financial instability had shaped her ambitions early in life. Watching her parents struggle to pay bills convinced her that wealth and security were the only paths to a comfortable life. Determined never to live in poverty again, Clara learned to present herself with charm and sophistication wherever opportunity appeared. At Daniel's office, Clara quickly attracted attention. She was intelligent, well-dressed, and remarkably skilled at building connections with influential colleagues. During meetings she spoke with confidence, and during company events she carried herself with a magnetic presence that people noticed immediately. Daniel first interacted with Clara during a business strategy discussion where her bold suggestions impressed several senior managers. From that moment, their professional interactions gradually became more frequent. What began as casual conversations during work breaks soon turned into longer discussions after office hours. Clara admired Daniel's ambition and often praised his leadership skills, something Daniel rarely heard at home as Susan focused more on emotional connection than professional success. Clara's admiration fed Daniel's ego, and the two began spending more time together outside of the office under the excuse of discussing work projects. Meanwhile, Susan remained unaware of Clara's growing presence in Daniel's life, continuing to trust that her husband was simply focused on his demanding career. As weeks passed, Susan began to notice small changes that unsettled her. Daniel was spending even more time away from home, often returning late at night with vague explanations about meetings and client dinners. At first she tried to ignore the feeling growing inside her, reminding herself that Daniel worked in a demanding industry. Still, something about his behavior felt different. He seemed distracted during conversations, sometimes checking his phone frequently or stepping into another room to answer calls. Susan attempted to maintain a peaceful home environment despite the distance she felt developing between them. She focused on her artwork, spending long hours in her studio room where large canvases slowly filled with soft ocean colors and quiet landscapes. Painting had always helped her organize her thoughts, but lately her brush strokes carried a hint of unease she couldn't fully explain. Even Emily Carter began to notice the change when they met for lunch one afternoon. Emily gently asked if everything was all right in Susan's marriage, sensing that her usually cheerful friend seemed quieter than before. Susan hesitated before answering, unsure if she was simply imagining things. She told Emily that Daniel had just been extremely busy with work and that she trusted him completely. Emily nodded but advised Susan to trust her instincts if something ever felt wrong. Susan left the meeting determined not to doubt her husband without reason. Yet as the days continued and Daniel's absence grew more frequent, the quiet suspicion in her heart slowly began to grow stronger, even though she still had no idea who was truly standing behind the changes in Daniel's life. While Susan tried to convince herself that everything was normal, Daniel and Clara were growing closer in ways that went far beyond professional collaboration. Their conversations after work slowly turned personal, and Clara learned how to speak to Daniel in ways that fed his ambition and ego. She praised his intelligence, admired his determination to succeed, and often hinted that he deserved a more glamorous life than the quiet domestic routine waiting for him at home. Daniel, who had begun to see his marriage as ordinary and restrictive, found Clara's words increasingly appealing. Clara, however, had her own motivations. She carefully studied Daniel's lifestyle, recognizing the advantages that came with his rising status in the financial world. To her, Daniel represented an opportunity, someone whose ambition matched her own desire for wealth and influence. She slowly positioned herself as the person who truly understood his goals. Their meetings outside the office became more frequent, taking place in expensive restaurants, upscale lounges, and quiet hotel bars where business discussions easily blended with personal attraction. Meanwhile, Susan remained focused on building a peaceful life despite Daniel's growing distance. She began planning a small art exhibition in London with encouragement from Emily, hoping it would help her establish herself as an artist in the city. She believed that success in her own work might bring fresh excitement into their marriage. What Susan didn't realize was that while she was preparing for a hopeful new chapter, Daniel and Clara were quietly moving deeper into a secret relationship that would soon lead to a cruel and unforgettable turning point in Susan's life. One evening Daniel returned home earlier than usual, carrying an unusual calmness that Susan had not seen in weeks. He greeted her with a warm smile and suggested that they attend an upcoming luxury hotel event together. According to Daniel, it was a corporate celebration hosted at one of London's most prestigious hotels, where several executives and investors would be gathering. He explained that bringing his wife would create a positive impression among colleagues and clients. Susan was surprised by the sudden change in his behavior, but felt hopeful that perhaps Daniel wanted to reconnect with her. Excited by the idea of spending time together again, Susan accepted the invitation without hesitation. Over the next few days she carefully prepared for the event, selecting an elegant dress and even finishing a new painting that she hoped to show Daniel before they left. She believed the evening might remind them of the early days of their relationship when everything had felt effortless and joyful. Daniel watched her quiet enthusiasm with an unreadable expression, offering compliments while quietly checking messages on his phone. Unknown to Susan, Daniel had already spoken with Clara about the event. Clara would also be present at the hotel that evening, though Susan was never meant to know that. Behind Daniel's calm demeanor was a carefully planned arrangement that would place Susan in a situation she could never have imagined. As the night of the event approached, Susan looked forward to an evening meant to strengthen her marriage, unaware that Daniel and Clara had very different intentions waiting for her inside the Grand Hotel. The luxury hotel glowed with warm lights as guests arrived dressed in elegant evening attire. Crystal chandeliers hung from the high ceilings, and soft music drifted through the grand hall where business executives and investors gathered to celebrate the company's achievements. Susan walked beside Daniel, admiring the beauty of the place and feeling hopeful that the evening might bring them closer again. She greeted several of Daniel's colleagues politely while he introduced her with a confident smile, maintaining the appearance of a devoted husband. After some time inside the crowded hall, Susan excused herself to visit the restroom. Daniel nodded casually, watching as she walked down the quiet corridor that led away from the event hall. Moments later, Clara Patterson appeared nearby, her presence carefully timed. Daniel followed Susan shortly after she entered the restroom, and Clara quietly joined him near the entrance. Their expressions carried none of the charm they had shown in public. Instead, there was a cold determination in their actions. Inside the restroom, Susan was washing her hands when Daniel and Clara suddenly appeared. Confused and startled by Clara's presence, Susan tried to understand what was happening, but Daniel's expression had become distant and unforgiving. Before she could react, they forced her into one of the stalls and locked the door from the outside. Clara's voice carried a cruel satisfaction while Daniel remained silent. With the stall secured, the two of them left the restroom and returned to the celebration, leaving Susan trapped alone. At first she called out, believing someone would hear her, but the loud music from the event hall drowned out her voice. Hours passed as exhaustion and fear slowly overtook her strength, until the quiet restroom grew cold and silent, and Susan eventually collapsed unconscious behind the locked door. Late that night, as the celebration at the hotel slowly began to quiet down, another guest arrived at the building for a private business meeting scheduled in one of the executive suites. His name was Solomon Brooks, the well-known CEO of Brooks Global Holdings. At 35, Solomon had already built an international reputation as a brilliant entrepreneur and investor. Calm, observant, and respected in the corporate world, he carried himself with quiet authority. Unlike many executives who enjoyed noisy celebrations, Solomon preferred quiet environments where he could think clearly and focus on important decisions. After finishing a long discussion with his associates, Solomon stepped away from the conference room and walked down a quiet corridor in search of a restroom. The hallways were mostly empty now, the earlier excitement of the event having faded into distant echoes of music and conversation. As he entered the restroom, he noticed something unusual. One of the stall doors was locked from the outside, something that immediately caught his attention. At first he assumed it was a mistake left by the cleaning staff, but a faint sound from inside made him pause. Concerned, Solomon quickly unlocked the stall and pushed the door open. Inside he found a young woman collapsed on the floor, pale and unconscious. It was Susan Hayes. Shocked by the sight, Solomon immediately knelt beside her and checked her breathing. Though weak, she was still alive. Without wasting time, he called hotel staff and arranged for immediate medical assistance. Susan was carefully carried out of the restroom and taken to Solomon's car so she could be transported somewhere safe. Watching her fragile state stirred something unexpected within Solomon, a deep concern for a stranger he had just met. He had no idea who she was or why she had been left there, but in that moment he felt a quiet determination to make sure she would be protected. Susan slowly regained consciousness in a quiet and unfamiliar room. Soft morning light filtered through tall windows, and the air carried the faint scent of fresh flowers. For a moment she felt disoriented, unsure where she was or how she had arrived there. The last memory she could recall was the cold restroom floor and the crushing realization that Daniel and Clara had abandoned her. Panic briefly filled her mind, but the calm surroundings around her made her pause. The room she was in belonged to a large, elegant home located in a peaceful part of London. It was the residence of Solomon Brooks. After discovering Susan in the hotel, Solomon had brought her to his home where a trusted doctor, Dr. Hannah Cole, examined her carefully. Dr. Cole determined that Susan had collapsed due to exhaustion, dehydration, and emotional distress. Thankfully, there were no serious injuries. Solomon had instructed the household staff to ensure she received proper care until she fully recovered. When Susan finally opened her eyes, Solomon was sitting quietly near the window, reading through some documents while occasionally glancing toward her to check if she had woken up. As she stirred, he immediately stood and approached with calm concern. His voice was gentle as he explained that he had found her in the hotel restroom the previous night. Susan listened in silence, still processing everything that had happened. Though they were strangers, something about Solomon's calm presence made her feel unexpectedly safe. For the first time since the cruel betrayal she had experienced, Susan felt that she might not be alone in facing whatever came next. Later that afternoon, Susan sat quietly in the spacious living room of Solomon Brooks' home. The large windows overlooked a peaceful garden where soft sunlight illuminated rows of carefully tended flowers. Though the surroundings were beautiful, Susan's mind was still heavy with confusion and emotion. Solomon sat across from her, giving her the space and patience she needed to gather her thoughts. He had no intention of pressuring her, but he could sense that the story behind her condition the previous night was far more troubling than a simple accident. After a long silence, Susan slowly began to explain what had happened. Her voice was calm but filled with pain as she described her marriage to Danielle Clifford, the growing distance between them, and the hotel event that had been presented as an opportunity to reconnect. When she reached the moment inside the restroom, her hands trembled slightly. She told Solomon how Danielle and Clara had trapped her in the stall and left her there without any concern for her safety. Saying the words aloud made the betrayal feel even more real. Solomon listened carefully without interrupting. His expression remained controlled, but inside he felt a deep sense of anger toward the cruelty Susan had endured. He had spent years navigating difficult business environments, yet even he was disturbed by the heartless actions she described. When Susan finished speaking, Solomon assured her that she was safe in his home and that she would not face the situation alone. His words carried calm confidence, offering Susan a sense of stability she desperately needed as she began to face the painful reality of her broken marriage. In the days that followed, Susan remained at Solomon Brooks' home while she slowly regained her strength. The peaceful environment of the house helped her recover both physically and emotionally. The residence was large but calm, surrounded by a beautiful garden where tall trees and colorful flowers created a quiet retreat from the noise of the city. Each morning Susan would sit near the windows or walk slowly through the garden paths, allowing herself time to process everything that had happened. Solomon made sure she was comfortable but never intruded on her personal space. He respected her need for time and allowed her to move at her own pace. Occasionally they shared simple conversations during breakfast or evening tea, and through these quiet moments Solomon began to see Susan's true character. Despite the betrayal she had experienced, she remained kind, thoughtful, and sincere. Her love for art returned gradually, and one afternoon she began sketching again using materials Solomon had asked his staff to provide for her. During one of their conversations, Susan spoke about her parents in Brighton and her dream of opening an art studio someday. Solomon listened with genuine interest, admiring the quiet determination in her voice. He realized that behind Susan's gentle nature was a remarkable strength. Meanwhile, Susan began to see Solomon not just as the man who had rescued her, but as someone with the calm wisdom and kindness she had rarely encountered before. Though neither of them spoke openly about it, a quiet understanding was beginning to grow between them, marking the first step toward a new chapter in Susan's life. As Susan continued recovering, the quiet rhythm of life inside Solomon Brooks' home slowly became familiar to her. The large residence, though elegant, carried a warm and welcoming atmosphere. The staff treated her with respect, and Solomon ensured she felt comfortable without making her feel like a guest who needed constant attention. Gradually, Susan began spending more time outside her room, often sitting in the garden where she sketched the flowers and trees that surrounded the property. During the evenings, Solomon sometimes joined her for tea on the garden terrace. Their conversations were calm and thoughtful, touching on many topics, from art and travel to business and personal dreams. Susan learned more about Solomon's life, including how he had built Brooks Global Holdings after years of dedication and difficult decisions. He spoke about his father, Edward Brooks, whose values of integrity and discipline had guided him throughout his career. Though Solomon had achieved great success, he admitted that trust had always been difficult for him because many people approached him only for personal gain. Susan's sincerity stood in sharp contrast to those experiences. She never treated him with admiration because of his wealth or status. Instead, she spoke to him with simple honesty. Solomon found himself increasingly drawn to her quiet strength and kindness. At the same time, Susan felt a growing sense of comfort around him that she had not expected. The pain of her past betrayal had not disappeared, but in Solomon's presence she began to feel something new, hope that life could offer unexpected connections and possibilities beyond the heartbreak she had endured. As Susan's strength returned, she began thinking seriously about the life she had left behind. The quiet days at Solomon's home had given her time to reflect on everything that had happened. The betrayal from Danielle and Clara still hurt deeply, but the shock that once overwhelmed her had slowly turned into determination. She realized that remaining silent would only allow their cruelty to go unanswered. For the first time since the hotel incident, Susan felt ready to face the truth of her broken marriage. During one of their conversations, Susan shared her thoughts with Solomon. She explained that she wanted to legally separate from Daniel and rebuild her life on her own terms. Solomon listened carefully and supported her decision without trying to influence it. He believed that Susan deserved the chance to reclaim her independence and dignity. With his guidance, she began contacting a lawyer who specialized in family law to begin the formal process of ending her marriage. At the same time, Susan reconnected with her best friend Emily Carter, who was both shocked and furious after hearing the full story. As a journalist, Emily had a strong sense of justice and promised to help Susan gather the necessary information to expose Daniel's actions if needed. Though the path ahead would not be easy, Susan no longer felt powerless. Surrounded by people who cared about her well-being, she prepared herself to confront the past and step confidently toward a future that belonged entirely to her. A few weeks later, Susan felt strong enough to face Daniel Clifford directly. With the support of her lawyer and the quiet encouragement of Solomon Brooks, she arranged a meeting in a private conference room at a law office in London. The room was calm and professional, far removed from the emotional chaos that had once surrounded her marriage. Susan arrived with steady determination, dressed simply but confidently, ready to close a painful chapter of her life. Daniel arrived shortly after, accompanied by Clara Patterson. Both of them were visibly surprised to see Susan sitting calmly at the table. For weeks they had believed she had simply disappeared after the hotel incident, assuming the situation would quietly fade away. Instead, Susan now sat before them with clear evidence of what had happened that night. Her lawyer explained the legal consequences of their actions, including abandonment and emotional harm. The confident expressions Daniel and Clara once carried slowly began to fade as the seriousness of the situation became clear. Susan spoke calmly, her voice steady as she described the betrayal she had endured. She no longer sounded hurt or uncertain. Instead she spoke with clarity and strength. She made it clear that the marriage was over and that she intended to move forward with her life without them. Daniel attempted to defend himself, but his excuses sounded empty against the truth already laid out before him. When the meeting ended, Susan walked out of the building with the sense of relief she had not felt in months. The confrontation had not erased the pain of the past, but it had given her something far more important, the freedom to begin again. After the confrontation, Susan felt a sense of calm that she had not experienced in a long time. The legal process moved forward steadily, and it soon became clear that her marriage to Daniel Clifford had reached its final end. Though the memories of betrayal still existed, they no longer controlled her emotions the way they once had. With the support of her lawyer and the encouragement of those around her, Susan officially stepped away from the life she had shared with Daniel. In the weeks that followed, Susan began focusing on rebuilding her future. She returned to painting with renewed passion, creating artwork inspired by the emotional journey she had survived. Solomon continued to support her quietly, often encouraging her to believe in her talent and reminding her that new beginnings were possible. With his help, Susan was introduced to several art gallery owners who admired her work and expressed interest in showcasing her paintings in upcoming exhibitions. Meanwhile, Susan also reconnected with her parents in Brighton, sharing the truth about everything that had happened. Though they were saddened by the pain their daughter had endured, they were proud of her courage and strength. With their support and the growing confidence she had found within herself, Susan began to see her life not as something broken by the past, but as something being rebuilt with greater clarity and purpose. The future that once felt uncertain was slowly transforming into a new path filled with opportunity and hope. Months passed, and Susan Hayes stood inside a bright London art gallery surrounded by her paintings. The exhibition marked the beginning of a new chapter in her life. Visitors moved quietly through the gallery, admiring the landscapes and emotional pieces she had created during her journey of healing. Each painting carried a story of resilience, of pain transformed into beauty, and of hope that had slowly returned after a difficult chapter. Among the guests that evening was Solomon Brooks, standing quietly near one of Susan's most admired paintings. He watched as people praised her work, proud of how far she had come since the day he found her in the hotel restroom. Throughout the months that followed her recovery, Solomon had supported her not with grand gestures but with patience, respect, and encouragement. Their friendship had grown naturally, built on trust and understanding rather than pressure or expectation. As the exhibition ended and the guests slowly departed, Susan stepped outside onto the gallery balcony where the evening city lights glowed below. Solomon joined her there, and for a moment they simply enjoyed the quiet view. Susan thanked him sincerely for everything he had done for her. Solomon smiled gently and told her that sometimes life brings unexpected encounters that change everything. Standing together under the calm night sky, Susan realized that the painful past she once feared had led her toward a stronger future. For the first time in a long while, she felt certain that this new beginning truly belonged to her. And that brings us to the end of today's story. The world of luxury often hides stories deeper than what meets the eye. If you enjoyed this story, be sure to like, share, and subscribe for more captivating stories on Luxury Jewel Life Stories. Until our next story, take care and stay tuned for more.